That is now live.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good afternoon all. I think we're in for an interesting afternoon. Need to start with the following announcement. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website, and also to all officers and members who are here gathered this afternoon. As you know, there's always a risk we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is rectified, and if we cannot do that, then we'll have to abandon the meeting at such time as it can be. May I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the Council's website. Members, I need to begin by calling the names of all the members of the committee to establish your attendance, even though I can see you all. When I call your name, please unmute your microphone and confirm you're present. Councillor McMaguire. Can't hear.
Sorry, I was muted. Present.
Councillor Peter Hudson.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Terry Rogers.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Sanderson.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Wells. Not yet. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, good afternoon, present.
And I'm also here, and I'm Councillor Mike Shullens. Would the Democratic Services Officer, Manager rather, report any apologies for absence?
I've not received any apologies. I can see that Councillor Wells isn't here at the moment, but I haven't received any formal apologies.
Okay. Next exciting item. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? This is one of the trip-up phrases that they put at the beginning of each meeting. I don't see any hands. I'm going to take that as negative. Minutes of the meeting. Rob, I understand you have a couple of things you wish to draw to our attention.
Yes, Chairman, just to say that in the time frame, time of the meeting, it's showing 2 p.m. to 3:24. That's not correct. It was a morning meeting for a change. It was 10 a.m. to 12:06. I have put a new version on the web.
Right.
That's the only.
Any other critical issues like that? Rob, that all?
That's all from me.
Good, thank you. Right. So the first item is, sorry, I've got a phone ringing, but it'll be picked up. Right. So the first thing we need to do is to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 30th of October as being a correct record only. Can I ask any member who does not agree with this proposal to click the raised hand function? Right, I would take that as negative. I just have one thing I wish to point out or draw to people's attention, which is that there is the statement by the auditor that the pensions audit has gone very smoothly, and I want to repeat our thanks to the people who managed to organize their work in such a way that that occurred. Before I go on, I want to try and see if we can, well, I think there are a number of issues that suggest adjustments to the agenda. Mark needs to be away by 3:15 at the end, but at least he won't have to drive to Norwich, so that's... Diane Steigel is on compassionate leave and will not be with us. Therefore, I propose, sorry, so I'm going to bring Mark's item forward. Diane is not available to be with us today. So what I suggest we do is still go through and discuss her report, and we will put any questions to her via email on her return. Right. Rob, I think that brings us into the action log, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's correct, Chairman. I think there's some updates that Neil will be able to provide on the request for interim reviews on key financial systems and the national fraud matching exercise. Your request that we shouldn't be involved in next year's national fraud matching exercise if possible.
Right. Okay, my screen of the minutes now seems, or of the thing seems to have frozen, which is unhelpful. I may need to deal with that. Neil, do you want to bring us up to speed with the couple of items that you were going to deal with?
Certainly, Chair. Yeah, 265A, outstanding audit recommendations are at Appendix B on item 9 on this agenda. 265A again, there are two 265As just to confuse this time. The updated plan that was requested last time is at Appendix A of the agenda item 9. The supply relief is referred to at 3.3.1 of agenda 9 on this meeting as well. I believe that the Chief Internal Auditor did have a meeting with you last week and hopefully talked you through the audit plan changes. If not, they are on the Appendix B for Agenda 9's paper today.
Right.
Then I believe we go on to the whistleblowing report. Key officer changes. I understand that, well, I emailed on the 17th of November to give you a summary of the changes as requested. So hopefully that's been done and you receive that.
Yep.
The next two will just be kept on logs, B and C. Then the internal audit draft annual report, the update on interim reviews on key financial systems. That's the CCC-led audits have commenced. So that's treasury management, debt recovery, AP and AR, accounts payable and accounts receivable. I've referred the request from the committee to have interim reports on the remaining key financial systems to the Chief Internal Auditor and also the lead auditor for those reviews. And I'm not sure we've got an agreement to do interim reports, interim audits, but I understand they've been scheduled to be completed before the 31st of March 2021, as it is now. So they are imminently about to start. I don't know if the Chief Internal Auditor wants to pick up on that at all.
Nothing to add there, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Neil.
No worries. Then paragraph B, we put on the last report some anti-fraud and corruption cases. There were a couple that the committee queried. Mainly, the sort of main one was the blue badges and whether or not that had been closed. And the answer is that there were two specific cases there. One has been closed, and one is being followed up through the normal actions. And the remainder. Sorry,
what sort of thing causes that to happen, Neil?
It's effectively people claiming for blue badges who are not entitled to, so either not giving them back or fraudulently claiming in the first place. And when that's identified, the council takes appropriate action through the internal audit team. Often they come around through NFI matches or through whistleblowing.
Right, and presumably this could happen if a member of the household with a blue badge dies and they fail to return the blue badge but continue to use it.
That's exactly what can happen, Chair, yes.
Right. Okay.
And then the final one, I think, was the NFI. You asked for sort of a cost benefit analysis, but basically of why we do NFI.
Yes.
I've referred that on to the counter fraud team, and I'm hoping to bring a brief paper back to the January 26th meeting.
January, yeah. I heard you to say January and then thought you said 2026. No, right.
We'll strive to be a little quicker than that, Chair.
I'd appreciate that. Rob, have you got that in your notes for the action for the
I have.
Items forthcoming, yes. Right. So is there anything else on? We take the audit plan changes later. National fraud. What did we say about cyberspace?
What you asked for, Chair, was a briefing offline with the audit lead. I've requested that briefing. It will come to you, but apparently we are waiting for the head or the deputy, no, actually the head of IT.
Sorry, say that again.
What you requested last time was a sort of a briefing offline to yourself from the audit lead. That's been requested, and that will happen. But just for the moment, the team is waiting for a response from the head of IT at Cambridgeshire on one or two of the recommendations. As soon as that response is received, then the office will be in touch, Chair.
Good, thank you. Highways we've got, I think, covered up in item 9. Appendix A, have we got to Appendix A in your discussion of this item, Neil?
Yeah, actually, that's
fine. So
that isn't Appendix A. Actually, that's actually Appendix C, I think.
Right,
No.
But in Appendix A, I think it says that for information, our pensions performance, we were in the 67th percentile. And what I'm concerned about, and Terry, this may be you, is whether that's up or down. In other words, is we 67th percentile from the top or from the bottom? Mute, Terry. Thank you. Can't hear you.
I think that's basically 67th in, as you would normally measure a percentage in comparison to everybody else. We're basically up. I'd like to remind the chairman that as regards pensions, and we discussed this at the last meeting, of course, but for those who are listening and who weren't at the last meeting, the pensions were really hit because of the epidemic or the virus in the last 2 weeks of the financial year.
Yes.
Whereas we were at a funding level of 102, nearly 102%, sudden drop in our investments brought us down to just above 90%. So that was what hit us at the very end of the last year. So all the figures that we see are circumstances were beyond our control, so to speak, in that period of 3 weeks.
Yes,
I'm pleased to say now, of course, we're clawing our way back up.
Yes, very unfortunate timing. And I think there was a reference to one standard deviation in the preliminary report, and that's been removed. So I'm pleased about that because I didn't understand it. Anybody got any further comments on the action log, please? I take that as silence as golden. So we now turn, I think, to statement of accounts.
Chairman, just to say petitions and public questions, none were received.
None were received. Well done, Rob. Thank you. Statement of accounts and the EY comments, which is down at somewhere or other. 5B. Both very much in the same area. And we need to make sure that Mark has left. What has been agreed is that we'll start with the overview by finance, Tom and his acolytes, and then we'll switch after the first summary over to Mark so that he can get his points made before he departs to Norfolk, virtual Norfolk. Okay, Tom?
It's actually going to be me too, I think.
Oh, hello, me.
Hi. Okay, so this is the second viewing of the 1920 accounts for committee. The first draft was presented to committee back towards the end of July. Yep. This isn't quite the final version still. There are still a few outstanding areas to conclude with EY, which are outlined in section 4 of the covering report and also in EY's results report. There haven't been any fundamental changes to the account since the draft version. The main changes to the figures are outlined in section 3.1. They mainly arise as a result of reclassification. So, for example,
sorry, slow down, Ellie, and say that again.
They mainly arise as a result of reclassification. So,
right,
for example, between short-term and long-term borrowing. Also, the updated pension adjustment, which was as a result of obtaining a revised actuarial report, which was based on actuals rather than predicted performance.
Right. So for the first one, we're simply swapping one for another, so it doesn't affect the bottom line.
Yes.
Yes, but then
plus we've also
and
we've also made changes to the narrative as requested either by EY or by yourselves back in the July committee. Section 4.1 outlines the areas that are left to conclude. The most significant of that is property, plant and equipment. We have made some movement on that in the last week. So with information having been returned from the external valuers and some responses having been submitted to EY, but there are still several work streams to work through and conclude there. On payroll, again, we have progressed that again in the last week, but it hasn't still yet been completed. So there are still two main areas of work outstanding on that. Group accounts, I don't believe the position has changed there since the report was written. So we're still chasing this land's external auditors for their final report. And the post-balance sheet event note, that has been updated now since the report was written, but obviously it will need reviewing by EY as we head towards the signing date. I think Tom wants to make a quick note about going concern.
Yep, Chairman, if I could take the committee to page 80 of the agenda pack. This relates to going concern.
My version of the agenda seems to have no page numbers, which is a bit unhelpful. Can you help me with that? Where is the text? What is it?
Well, it's page 48 of the. It's headed going concern assumption.
Yeah. Okay.
It's page 48. My internet connection is struggling a bit, so we'll try and persevere. Going concern is the assumption that the accounts are produced on the basis that the authority's functions and services will continue for the foreseeable future. This is an area that's been gathering additional attention from auditors in general, and particularly this year because of the pandemic. We've expanded the disclosure we've made as a result of the pandemic looking ahead, and we'd expect that EY in their final opinion will modify the standard wording to give additional emphasis to this area. Members will be aware from other committees in the business planning approach that we've been using a scenario-based approach and trying to model the forward impact as best that we can given the current uncertainty. I think for the current year, we're now increasingly confident that the council's in a kind of robust position and will be broadly balanced overall this year. But looking ahead, particularly as at this point in time with the uncertainty connected to the spending review, there is the possibility that we'll need to change the approach going forward on reserves, service levels or council tax. And that really is the point that will come across in that going concern assumption and EY's emphasis on it. Thank you.
Okay, I think on going concerns, it's we're looking at a period of 12 months from the date of the report. So it's not from 31st of March, it's from now, effectively, or plus or minus a few days.
Yep,
okay. Right. Before if that completes the overview offered by Finance.
There was just one further bit I was going to highlight, which was that at the start of 2020, we did produce an action plan for committee, which set out a 2-year process for delivering improvements, both on the content of the accounts and also the process for delivering the accounts. We have made significant progress on that, which has been reflected in the quality of the draft accounts and also the working papers and responses that have been provided to EY, which hopefully they will echo. in some areas, but we are aware that there are still further improvements to be made, and so they're set out in section 4.4 of the covering report.
Good.
And I think that concludes what I was going to say.
Thank you. Before I bring in Mark, I just want to say that I've been sat here each year since I took up this role, and each year we've got new and wonderful reasons why I was destined for the naughty step, because we submitted our accounts late. And this generated much excitement in the months after the due date and immediately before the due date. And I got caught outside a polling station last year in order to sign the documents in a, well, anyway, right. I had hoped that with 2 extra months timetable to complete the accounts, that this year I might have been spared this embarrassment, and that doesn't seem to have happened. And I really want to know why. And perhaps, Mark, you could pay some thought to that, and I'll ask Tom obviously to comment on that, or Tom and his team to comment on it, because I do find it disappointing that here we are again and we're going to be late. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So appreciate that the committee will have been through our report, but I will pull out what I think are the key messages and assurances that the committee need, much like I did last month for the pension fund. But I'll top it and tail it with some context to start with, and then answer your question, Chair, at the end. So one of the impacts for this year is clearly that the whole of the preparation of the draft financial statements was prepared during lockdown version 1.0 in the country, and our whole audit has been completed remotely and electronically, so without any on-site contact with the finance team. And clearly,
if we ever got out of this, Mark, would you revert to plan A, or would you use some of the methods you've used this time?
So I think we are finding that you can do an audit remotely, but that doesn't make it more efficient necessarily, because contact with officers and getting questions and answers direct and seeing the whites of the eyes, if you like, can be a lot more efficient than an email trail. So I think there will be a hybrid in future years where we take the efficiencies that we've gained from electronic, but overlay that with the relationship you have with doing it on site.
Good.
So I think those two have driven the extension to the deadline in the first place, because preparation and audit has been hampered. But COVID itself has required significant additional financial reporting requirements, and therefore audit procedures, specifically around property, plant and equipment valuations and going concern. So I will touch upon those specifically and come to a conclusion for you later, Chair. So key elements to draw out for you, and I'll use your agenda paper references and my report page reference, if I'm that clever, as I go through. So materiality for the group and the single entity, i.e. the council, is £19.58 million. That's our key threshold for audit differences, if you like, and that's on page 6 or 286 of your pack. Then when we wrote the report a couple of weeks ago and issued it, there were a number of audit areas that were outstanding, and we listed those on our page 8, your page 288. So a quick update for you. So in terms of property, plant and equipment, as Ellie said, this is a significant area of work this year for a number of reasons, which I'll come on to later. There are a number of audit queries still outstanding which need to be resolved and worked through, but for good reason. And I'll come on to those. In terms of going concern, as Tom said, he has updated the disclosure note, and Tom and I have had a dialogue, and we're just awaiting one further update around the scenarios that Tom set out in his narrative before we are comfortable with the resultant and final disclosure note that will be within the financial statements. And again, I'll say more on the process in a moment. In terms of group reporting, we are still awaiting our assurances from RSM, who are the external auditor of This Land Limited. It was due on the 13th of November. We have chased it, but we haven't received it as of today.
Do you want me to invite their cooperation, or are you comfortable that it'll come?
There's no harm in leveraging a little bit of extra pressure.
Okay.
In terms of cash, we are still awaiting one confirmation from one of the external providers, again, which pressure has been applied to, so it's just currently outstanding. In terms of borrowings, we're just working through an update that we've received from officers between a split between long-term and short-term borrowing and the classification of that within the note. So we have received the information and we are auditing it. In terms of payroll, like Ellie said, we have now got the information, but we just need to resolve a couple of questions as a result of receiving said information. And then the last one on unrecorded liabilities, we need to do that up to the date of the audit opinion. So that's kind of one of the last tests we need to do. So it may sound like a relatively long list, but there's quite a few in there which are quick to knock off. It's literally property, plant and equipment that is the biggest one of those. So talking about audit differences, this is, I think, a good news story and some assurance you can take as a committee. So this is page 289 of your agenda pack, or page 9, Mike, if you're our report. So currently we have 3 unadjusted audit differences, which we have highlighted to management, but they have chosen not to amend for, which Tom might say a bit more when I finish, but the cumulative impact of those is only £6.61 million. So clearly not material compared to our materiality level of 19.58 million. So those would not impact on our audit opinion, and I'll come to that as well later. But this committee would need to concur with management's view not to adjust for those differences.
Sorry, say that last bit again.
This committee would need to concur with management's view not to adjust for them. Then we are also reporting 7 adjusted differences on page 290 and 291, I think. There may be more as a result of our work on property, plant and equipment, but we have given you a full disclosure of all those adjusted differences. None of them is overly significant in nature that I need to draw out and highlight for you now, but they are set out for transparency within that section, and all of those have been adjusted for within the revised financial statements. In terms of powers and audit duties, we have received 1 objection to the financial statements. We have not determined whether it's a valid objection at this point in time, because we await the conclusion of prior year objections by both BDO and the one that we are awaiting to start and conclude when BDO have opined on their ones and their related years. So that level of audit difference is not significant in my view, and you should hold on to that message as we go through the rest of my information for you. I'd now like to go and talk about the audit risks we had in our audit plan that we presented to you and how we've got assurance over the procedures we've performed for them. So the first one is in terms of fraud risks on page is 294 to 296 of your pack, or 14 to 16 of our report, Mike. We have not identified any occurrences of fraud or management override or financial misreporting as a result of any of our procedures. In terms of evaluation of property, plant and equipment, this is a key area for us for a number of reasons. Firstly, because the council has a new valuer in the year. Secondly, because of COVID-19 and what that meant to the market at the 31st of March. And the fact, as we've talked about before, all valuers were including a material uncertainty clause within their valuation reports because there was not a ready active market for assets at the balance sheet date. And therefore there was some potential issue of whether those valuations were appropriate or correct at that point in time.
Mark, can you expand a bit on what the significance of a material uncertainty notice is?
Indeed. So I think the wording of the clause is that the valuers were saying the value of your assets that we have looked at is X, but we are putting this clause over that value of X because we cannot appropriately come out and value it because we're in lockdown at
So
the
it's
point
sort
in
of,
time. So they haven't
don't hold
physically
me to it.
inspected them, and there was no market for them to say, well, it should be this. So yes, it's, if you like, Mike, it's, they think it should be X, but it potentially could be Y, and they don't know what the difference between X and Y would be.
And what difference does that make to the overall audit?
A significant difference.
Right.
Because if
and
the
how long could you keep this story running?
So there's two issues, and so there are updated market reports because clearly lockdown 1 finished and the market for selling assets returned. So there are updated market reports which are able to demonstrate by how much the market may have moved, and therefore if you work that back, what impact that would have had on the 31st of March valuation. So that bit's relatively quick to clear down, and Tom and Ellie will be adding an element of description to their estimation uncertainty note to update that material uncertainty clause as a result of our work. So that one's a very short piece of string, Mike.
Right.
But some of our asset testing this year has identified some unusual things. So we have found that the council owns a solar farm, which was called Project 24 in the asset register, so not highlighted as a solar farm, and it was valued on the wrong basis and subsequently required a specialist valuation because solar farms are very specialist in asset type and valuation basis. So that's just one example of our asset work that's ongoing currently. In terms of pensions assurance on page 298 and 299 of the agenda pack, we have got the assurances from the pension fund auditor, i.e. me, and that recognises that the asset valuations went up as reported in the pension fund, and that has had a knock-on impact of reducing the pension fund liability for the council. And as Tom said, taking that and the McLeod issues into account, a revised actuarial report was produced, and Tom has adjusted, or Ellie or Michelle have adjusted the accounts in respect of the pension liability. So that is all sorted and done. We had grants as a significant risk area because we identified a significant number of issues in last year's audit. This year is significantly better and much better referenced and evidenced. There was only one classification error that we've identified this year between net cost of services and tax and non-specific grant income lines in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So none of the issues that we encountered last year. In terms of schools converting to academy status, we have no matters to raise with you. And the same is true of sensitive notes such as officer remuneration and exit costs. In terms of private finance initiative on page 302, there remains a technical issue which we have a recommendation for later in the report aligned to minimum revenue provision, but the legacy audit difference from last year's unadjusted item was corrected this year, and therefore the PFI model we are comfortable with, and we have no other issues to report. Same is true for heritage assets, no matters to report, and dedicated schools grant, no matters to report. So in all the kind of the big ticket areas that link to an audit risk, we have got sufficient comfort over, with the exception of property, plant and equipment, which we are still working through. The other big area to pull out is going concern. As Tom said, it's an unusual year impacted by COVID because the going concern period is 12 months from the date of approval of the financial statements. That would cover 2 fiscal years, one of which doesn't have a government settlement yet. So management have provided us with a detailed assessment, including a number of scenarios that Tom highlighted, and we have looked at those scenarios and the assessment, and we have stress tested them. We've also paid particular attention to the liquidity of the council and the reserve position of the council at the end of each of the 2 fiscal years, and indeed the disclosure notes associated with them. So our assessment is that the assessment done by management is robust.
Well done, management.
We have required additional narrative in the disclosure note to make it clear to a lay reader what the issue is. And we will be having an emphasis of matter paragraph within our audit opinion to draw a lay reader to that note so they can take it into account when they read the rest of the financial statements, and that is note 41. So in essence, that enhanced narrative is to fully reflect the position and the impact on the council's reserves and what that may mean in terms of key council decisions upcoming, in terms of whether you need to unearmark some reserves that were allocated to specific corporate policy objectives, or indeed do something with local taxation. So the emphasis of matter paragraph has the purpose of saying it's pretty tough now, but it could get even tougher going forward.
What did you have in mind with local taxation?
I don't have anything in mind particularly, but the council may need to review it if it is to address the financial consequences that COVID positions yourself in.
Tom, can you see any opportunities there?
I think what I'd say, Chairman, is we're receiving a technical assessment from EY. They have to go through a technical process to reach their report, and then clearly after that we'll get to the MTFS separately, and there are party political considerations to be made on that in the round. And that's
right. I mean, I was wondering whether this was NDR we were talking about, because income council tax is relatively fixed, and I accept what you said about political considerations, but
yeah, so on that point we're much more exposed to council tax because of the proportions we receive, so that the exposure to non-domestic rates is smaller, and at this moment there is just uncertainty really, and this is where we are reliant on districts to some extent on actual collection rates in year, and we're looking very closely at the submissions they're returning to central government in terms of collection so far and forward projection.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's okay. So just for the committee's clarification, an emphasis of matter paragraph is not a qualification of the audit report. It does not undermine the true and fair nature of the financial statements. It is merely a signposting by us to a lay reader that we think a specific note or notes in the accounts should be read first before a reader then goes on to the rest of the accounts. So just for clarity, it is not used overly often, but it doesn't mean the accounts are wrong in layman's terms. So I think you equally need to keep that in mind. And the form of words for that emphasis of matter is set out on page 306 of your agenda pack.
Mark, sorry to cut you up again, but we have a difficult situation at the moment. I'm not sure that this is going to resolve itself quickly. How long could you keep an emphasis of matter note going before somebody says, oh, come on, you've got to sort this out?
I think you're right, it is a continuum. So in our audit world continuum, you go from no emphasis of matter, so a totally clean audit report like we had last year, then you have an emphasis of matter to raise an issue, and if it gets even more significant, then we would have a material uncertainty.
Right.
And at the point that we are talking about a material uncertainty, I'm sure that Mr. Mallion and Tom together would be thinking about their respective responsibilities under section 114 of the Local Government Act.
Happily, I shall not be in this position at that stage, so that's good. Thank you.
But we are not at that stage, and an emphasis matter is just flagging at this point in time, just for clarity. So if I take all of those assurances against all of those risks together and those audit differences, with the satisfactory resolution of our work on property, plant and equipment, any adjustments that come out of that, we would be proposing an unqualified, true and fair audit opinion on the financial statements.
I think the council would be pleased to receive that.
I would too. And value for money, clearly our other responsibility. It's not in this report because, as you know from our audit plan, we haven't commenced any work in relation to that because 2017-18 and 2018-19 conclusions have not been issued yet, and therefore we can't commence it. So that is not in this report. So this is purely about the financial statements.
Can I just inject a note there? As you know, we've been trying to badger BDO into coming up with their answer to the questions that were posed to them in 17-18, 18-19, and now 19-20. They have been extremely dilatory. I wrote them a letter about a year ago and they've just responded to it, which sort of indicates their, well, I won't go on. There was to be a meeting between Lisa Clampin, who's known to a number of councillors here, and Gillian Beasley on the 10th of November. And she then cried off. Apparently she was sick. Whether or not that was a diplomatic sick because they hadn't completed it, or whether it was a real sick, I don't know. The new meeting is fixed for the 3rd of December. Thank you, Mark. Sorry.
No worries. So just to conclude, so with the exception of property, plant and equipment, I would say that we're in a pretty good place and pretty much ready to go and to sign off. And I think taking into account your question, Mike, that is a significant step up from last year's audit and previous year's audit, as I understand them. But property, plant and equipment is a significant area. It is a significant risk, and COVID has only heightened that. And going through those procedures to get to a materially correct position is key. So whilst we may not hit the 30th of November, I wouldn't say that is naughty step territory. I think that is having a proper set of accounts that fairly reflect the valuation position of the council at a point in time. I think naughty step now is if you don't have a set of draft accounts that are prepared to that date and are then adequately supported by appropriate working papers to allow an auditor to get sufficient audit evidence in an appropriate timescale. We're not talking about that this year. We're talking about procedures as a result of a specific risk. So I think there is a difference that this committee should take into account. So realistically, we may take it beyond the 30th of November by a matter of days or a week. That would have an impact on us not being able to sign the pension fund opinion because they have to be signed on the same date. But that's just a matter of fact to opine to you. So I would say if you take all of that together, both the context, the assurances, and then that conclusion, this audit has been significantly better than my previous year's experience. And I think Tom and Ellie and Michelle have done a good job with the draft accounts and the action plan they worked up last January. There are some areas that can have greater improvement for next year, but we're at the margins as opposed to looking at the whole now. And I think that's a far better position to be in.
I was disappointed that Michelle didn't bow graciously when you said all that. Or Ellie, likewise. Yes. Okay, Mark, sorry. Are you done?
Yeah.
Right. Well done, people. I say that before I go on to my residual comments. I suppose the big one is 2 months extra. Why are we still not there?
Well, sorry. Do you want to go, Tom? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll say something first of all, and I think so. The context Mark's provided is really helpful about the continuing improvement, and I think there is something about the position in the wider sector that the Redmond review has reflected that connects to timelines everywhere, the large percentages of authorities not complying with the timescales, and resourcing of auditors, resourcing of local government finance teams, etc. But the Cambridgeshire context, which is really important, is that we are in a improving position. So we're very confident we're going to sign 2 months earlier than last year with significantly fewer inaccuracies and a much better audit. And that's a tribute really to Michelle and Ellie and the kind of situation they picked up, particularly coming out of LGSS and a new system. But there is, as Ellie was saying, it's a 2-year improvement plan at least, and there are a number of areas still to be improved. I think as we've gone through, it's very apparent the accounts are the result of a number of different components, and every single one of those components needs to be highly tuned, I suppose, for this to work exactly on time. And I think the 2 major areas this year are around timeliness of payroll information and property, plant and equipment, and accuracy and quality of some of that data. So they're going to be 2 major areas for focus heading into next year.
Right. I repeat again, you've done well. I'm very grateful, and I have registered you, Terry, but it ain't happened yet. Tell me about payroll. What's the problem?
I think really this is, and Michelle may want to comment on this one further, but this is just quality, accuracy, and availability of information. And again, this in some ways connects to the kind of fallout of LGSS and how that's managed going forwards, because that will be a lead authority service that isn't provided by Cambridgeshire or a joint committee going forward. So that, if I'm honest, I think the finance team have had to get much too involved really in checking the quality of information, prompting for replies than we should have been. And we need to be taking that through the new governance processes really for escalating those sort of issues.
Can I register my surprise that we don't have accurate information coming out of payroll? It seems to me to be the one area where I would expect it to be copper bottom.
I think what the results report shows is that we haven't detected any inaccuracies in how people have actually been paid, or material inaccuracies anyway. And that accurate information is there, but it can prove onerous at times to get that consolidated in a way that stands up to external auditor working papers. So that's the challenge.
Okay.
I'll just say one more thing, sorry, about there has been a very definite knock-on impact of how long it took to get to a signed position for the prior year accounts.
Yes, you've been consistently saying that, yes.
In preparing for this year, that we ended up being almost upon the year end before we could begin properly and fully our preparation for the new year. And that has had an impact on how long this has taken to do this year's.
Okay, Terry, you've had a flag up for some considerable time. I'm sorry for keeping you.
Your pleasure, Chairman. As I see it, the reliance on external inputs has affected us quite dramatically to a degree. I mean, talking about cash and the like, and I'm hoping that in the future we can crack the whip a little bit harder as far as they're concerned. But one of the things that does worry me, over the past 2 years, as far as I can remember, we've always had this problem with property, plant and equipment. How are we really going to get grips with this, Tom? Because I thought we might have been up and running by now in that particular area.
Yeah, and it stems back more than 2 years really, and I think.
Well, I didn't want to.
Yeah, and we could go through them, but there's been slightly different issues each year. But I have to say, some of the sampling issues that Mark referred to are very disappointing to find, that we haven't got a system that has accurately reported we've got a solar farm, for instance, or providing incorrect information about floor spaces or pupils attending schools, that sort of issue. And that's both about how data is held and the quality checking that goes into it. I think there is a general acceptance that isn't good enough, and Tony Cooper, who's come into the property team as assistant director, is very determined to take those sorts of issues, amongst others facing the property team, and the additional challenges they've got this year on the safety of our buildings, and take them forward and improve. So the C&I committee has received an improvement plan, but I think we have to be honest and say there are challenges resourcing that at the moment, and there's there are still IT obstacles to overcome that we're working on going forward to improve that position. But I have to acknowledge it hasn't been good enough, the quality of that data, and it does need to improve going forward.
Can I read members a note that I received from John Macmillan, where I raised the issue of quality of information. I think the data could always be better, but there are mitigating circumstances, not least the absence of a functioning asset management system and the difficulty that the council had in recruiting and retaining staff. The auditor's comments are not the whole story. The work on the asset management system, known as K2, was halted by Alex G, the interim head of property, when he joined in April 19. His preference was to purchase the system used by Peterborough, where he is Director of Operations. A procurement exercise to achieve this was started, but that was then halted by Tony Cooper, the new assistant director property, who joined in April 20. The intention now is to carry out a wider procurement exercise for a new asset management system, and this forms part of Tony property improvement plan, which he's presented to the C&I chair and Chris Mallion, and will be considered by a future C&I committee. I can remember we've had this sort of issue raised in audit after audit after audit, and there was shock that we hadn't got a proper asset management system. For a couple of years, we defended that and said, well, we had other ways of doing it. And then we said, yeah, well, we'd do one. But I mean, what bothers me is that if we now have to buy a new computer system and then load it up and then sort out all the shambles when you move from non-system A to system B, this ain't a 5-minute fix. Mac, I could see you nodding briefly. You're a bit muted.
Chairman, I didn't put my hand up, but I wasn't going to say, but since you've invited me, I will. I must admit, I mean, I agree with you. We've been arguing about or asking for this for ages, and
absolutely
to be amazed that we don't have a proper asset management system. The fact that somebody, I think that we were being told there that there was we were going to adopt the Peterborough one last year, but now looking for a new one. I'm assuming these are off-the-shelf type products. Certainly in the asset management I've been involved in, they were off-the-shelf products. I'm just worried that you should be able to transfer data ideally between any two systems, but notwithstanding that, I'm notwithstanding that C&I are going to be looking at this, I can't help thinking that we as an audit account ought to make a comment to the effect that this has been going on for far too long, just to add, if you like, weight to anything that's being reported to C&I.
I had it in mind, Mac, to invite Tony Cooper to the next meeting of this committee to say, where are we and when's it going to be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, Chairman. I would agree with that. But I think C&I have to be made aware of our concerns and not simply take this as a kind of a routine thing for them, given that C&I as a committee hasn't been around many years, not as many years as we've been concerned about this.
Yes.
So I'm suggesting that, something needs to be fed into their committee.
Right, I entirely agree with that. And as I sit on C&I might, it might possibly happen.
Chairman, my
Mr.
hand
Hudson,
is up.
Councillor Hudson.
This is desperation. I despair. It's unforgivable. I mean, yes, Tom's right. 2 years. I think it was 3 years ago, Mr. Macmillan come to our committee at our invitation purely on the valuation of our buildings, our assets, and an asset register. I brought to his attention about the K2 software system that hadn't even been used. I think that may have been just before, just Mr. G joined the team. And this is 3 years ago. So
Yes.
we sent him away with the flannels here. And then he come back with some half-baked thing, which we totally wasn't keen on. So we sent a report to the C&I committee at the time, and they said they would take this on and they would sort it out. Obviously, we're back at square minus 20. So perhaps we should have Mr. McMillan back to explain what the hell is going on in the estates team once again.
I think it's possibly Tony Newton is the appropriate officer now, because he's the bloke who's got his fingers on the purse strings, presumably.
Well, Mr. McMillan come last time.
Yes.
And so I'm sure Mr. Cooper can come. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Cooper yet.
I think it's Newton. I think it's Newton.
Oh,
It's
Newton.
Cooper. It is Cooper.
It is
Whoever
Cooper.
it
I beg
is.
your pardon.
Look, whoever it is, let's get an answer and let's get it sorted, because it's absolutely deplorable. Thank you.
Rob, something else to slot in. You're going to enjoy this because you can set all these up and you won't have to do anything about them.
That's right. Yes, I shall add this to the forward agenda plan. But
Good.
that's a request to have a report on the officer at the next meeting in January, Mr. Cooper.
Good. Right. Anybody else want to? I've got a number of EY questions, but anybody else want to say anything at this stage? On the unadjusted audit differences, and we've got 3 left. What I'm trying to find out or get a feel for is this: do we have unadjusted audit differences because I've got 2 sets of accountants, each saying mine's right, no, mine's right, no, mine's right, no, mine's right? Or are there genuine errors? And if there are genuine errors, what do we put the genuine errors down? Is Michelle stupid? No. So why have we got errors that are coming out of the accounts? And the same applies to Ellie, incidentally. You're not stupid either. Is it lack of training? Is it new systems which are causing confusion, which is lack of training? Or is it lack of understanding? Or is it that things are happening lower down the hierarchy that you don't see until it's all too late? In which case we've got training issues further down. It seems to me that each year we have these differences flagged up and they never seem to go away in number, if not in content.
So I think there's 2 issues that are maybe slightly mixed up in there. We've got some audit adjustments that we have adjusted for.
Yes.
Differences that we have adjusted for.
Yeah.
And some that we haven't. Now, the only difference literally is whether we put an adjustment into the final accounts for those. And the 3 that we haven't is in relation because they impact on the outturn position, whereas the others were all within the balance sheet or
Swapping.
a technical adjustment.
Yeah.
So that's the only difference between the adjusted and unadjusted differences. The differences that have occurred in total, some of them are definitely a training issue that we have yet to be able to resolve, having gone on to ERP Gold. That we have been doing some training, but again, with the team being so involved in the last year's accounts for so long, that there was a knock-on effect of that. It's also worth bearing in mind that in an organisation the size of the council and the number of people involved in putting the information into the system, there will always be some issues where somebody's done something slightly strange. But as I was saying earlier, the bit that normally would deal with that is our team reviewing it prior to close down. And that's what we lost last year because of the accounts being later. So we have already got some of that review going on for the next year, and we're obviously going to have more time to do that. So by having those checks in, we get to pick up on where have we got training issues potentially, but also just time to iron out blips that have occurred and that kind of thing. You know, there was a big change when we implemented ERP Gold in the chart of accounts, what we expected and needed from people, and that has taken some time to embed, and I agree it is not there yet, and that is part of our 2-year improvement plan, is that we know we still need to feed some of that down.
Okay. I mean, what I would say is that I remember 2 or 3 audits ago, or perhaps even more, there was a big issue about the lateness of information coming from schools. And I haven't seen that reported this year. So that suggests that that was it was a major issue. That seems to have been dealt with. So I
And
recognise
given-
there is progress. It's just that
and given
more.
that actually that with the schools, it's even more important to note that, because obviously they actually we had lockdown and everything all around the year end, and we always have an issue with Easter timing as well with schools information. So this year was particularly helpful that we didn't experience those problems.
Right. I did see somewhere that the pension liability has increased its risk to a significant one. I think this is a Mark issue.
We did increase the risk designation to a significant audit risk as part of our audit planning process.
Right, but that doesn't come through into the final summary opinion.
Doesn't come through there because we addressed the risk by getting the assurances we needed from the pension fund auditor. So it was a risk at planning stage, highlighted, set of procedures undertaken, full assurance given, hence no issue to report.
Good.
Outside of the adjustments that Michelle has put through already.
Right, and these unadjusted differences at this stage, do they get sorted out in between audits so that we start next year with a clean slate? Or are we carrying forward accumulating errors?
So because of the nature of these, the majority of the impact is on the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, which is an in-year recording. So those will not recur in the next year. What we would do is that we obviously have added to our plan to do some further review of those same areas to make sure it doesn't actually reoccur, but it doesn't carry forward in that way.
Right.
The ones that would have done that, where they're involving the balance sheet, we have are those that we have actually already adjusted for.
Good. And I think my final point, you'll be pleased to hear, Mark, given that you need to go, is just to draw to the committee's attention that the increase in the fee so far is 54,000. I don't know if anybody wishes to comment on that or whether we just let Mark go with our thanks for what's happened so far. Silence. Mark, I think you're a free man.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking my item first.
Good. We're really grateful for the effort you've put in and for the for the way you've conducted it. And on behalf of the committee and the council, I look forward to this continuing in my absence. Okay. Enjoy Norwich.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you.
Mr. Kelly, I think we're back with you.
I don't think there's anything further from officers in introduction, so it's whether there's any further questions from members, and then coming to the recommendation and noting as well the unadjusted differences we've just referred to.
Right, Rob, I'm going to need to be dragged back to making sure that we pass this officially when we get there. Members, who has any issues with the statement of accounts? No, you're leaving it all to me again. Why did we bother to change valuers?
And that was due to procurement rules.
Go on.
We have to carry out a competitive process to appoint an external valuer for property valuations, and the last one was had expired. We had to carry out a new one, and the company we used last year was not on the framework to be able to actually put forward an offer for this year.
Right, because it must increase the amount of work that both sides have to do to start anew. How long can this one be on for?
Ellie, do you know how? I know it's at least.
So, as part of the last procurement process, we did actually procure this for 2 years. For this company for 2 years, so we have got the same value this year, I can't remember if that was 2 years with an option to extend to 5 or if it was a straight 2 years, but we will definitely be looking at longer contract periods going forward.
I would like an answer to that. And if the answer is wrong, i.e. we can only do it for 2 years, I'd like Tom to take this up and say this is not helpful, assuming that we're satisfied with the quality.
Yeah, that's the issue, is the quality, and part of the reason why I can't quite remember if we ended up with a straight 2 years is because we have had quality issues with previous valuers and we didn't want to be stuck with a valuer, a company that weren't providing what we needed. Obviously you factor that into the procurement process, and that's what we will do going forward.
It might just be worth adding, this is in Ellie's covering report, but we have, by moving the method of evaluation to modern equivalent basis or asset, something along. Yeah. So that really is an example of kind of short-term pain for longer-term gain, because I think by moving across to that at this point, it did mean we had to revalue more this year, but it should make the process smoother going forward and more compliant with what audit would expect. But it has meant more work this year, which has had a knock-on effect to property, plant and equipment, as we've been talking about.
Right. I understand that regarding that particular element, but I do think that changing people that we deal with on an ad hoc basis, well, unnecessarily, let me put it that way, is to be avoided if we possibly can. Except with a possible case of BDO, but I didn't say that. Right, I've dealt with property. I've dealt with value for money. What I find difficult to understand, and I suspect I'm going to get blamed for this, is that on my page 39, which is the summary page right at the beginning, we've got expenditure of plus 170 and income of plus 29. So we're a net 140 million down, but reserves have only changed by 28. Can somebody help me with that? Can't hear. Michelle, you're on mute.
Is that better? Sorry. It's like technological issues. So the thing to note is that reserves include unusable reserves. So they're around the timing differences for property valuations and pensions and that kind of thing. So those move in a completely, well, not completely, but in a different way to income and expenditure. And as
you've gone mute. No, can't hear.
So
yes.
When I change over to see the document, right, there is a note underneath that says it includes the amount of usable reserves. I can't see now because of it. Oh, bear with. Yes, so you'll see that there is an impact on the usable reserves.
Right, but 112 million difference seems rather a lot of difference. I've got a net of those two numbers of 140 million and we've got reserves of 28.
So that'll be as a result of how we have the statutory overrides for the accounts. So there are things that we have to declare as income and expenditure that are not allowed to impact on the council tax base, and therefore are adjusted through the movement in reserve statement, and that's where you get that disconnect.
Fine, okay. The outturn last year was a revenue overspend of £200,000, which I just want to, register my appreciation of that achievement, because that is a staggering difference from what I've been used to in years before. So well done to anybody that had anything to do with that. Assets and liabilities on my page 48. Why have we got property value revaluation losses?
So that mainly relates to that move to valuing on a modern equivalent asset basis that Tom referred to. So particularly in relation to our schools, we've changed the methodology so that we're now valuing what we would replace those assets with rather than what is actually necessarily there on the ground, and that just has resulted in a valuation loss.
Right. I think I mentioned CFR yesterday as an unexpanded acronym. On page 51, we're talking about this land and sales of properties. Wondering how that is going. Has there been any significant change since the draft report was written?
Yeah, I think there are some updates we'll make to that just before the final version, as this land have now sold property, certainly at Russell Street, and I think they've got 1 or 2 more pending in the next few days as well. So we'll make sure that's completely up to date, and post balance sheet events reflect that where appropriate as well.
Could somebody ping that to the committee, please?
Will do, yeah.
Thank you. And do the prices we're getting cover the costs?
In terms of this land's sale prices?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sales achievements.
So there's probably a limit to what I can say on this. There's the detail was in the confidential appendix to see an eye at the last meeting in terms of what the offers were. I think I can say in broad terms that they're meeting or exceeding the targets they've got in their business plan, which entails the company being successful overall across the whole portfolio. So it's pleasing so far.
That's fine. I won't push you any further. I mentioned on page 59 thinking about a table.
Yeah, and we have drafted one to consider what that looks like and whether that actually is simpler to understand than the current.
Yeah, I mean, as I see it, it's numbers with explanations by the side of it. Page 95, sorry not to have any issues in the interim. Allowances for members, I think, have gone down from 923 to 912. Just wish to highlight that. Salaries, when we get to 97, are up 105,000, but we've got some new posts in there. And the thing to remember is that full remuneration is shown for all employees, but CCC only pays part of many of these senior officer salaries because of our what sits with Peterborough. Again, to point out on page 99, salaries over 50,000, we need to highlight the fact that many of these are schools. Termination benefits, I found this quite staggering, have dropped from 2.084 to 1.227. Again, just drawing that to your attention. What are we going to do about the dedicated schools grant? This is the one was, I think, 7 million overspent last year, and we're now at 16 million overspent. And we've tried to get it subsidized, cross-subsidized, and that's been refused. Mr. Kelly.
So,
Can't hear you. Yeah.
So well, the first thing to say is we're pleased that the way we presented this is sort of past EY's audit, because it, on the face of it, is unusual that you can have a negative reserve in local government, and the government had to have a couple of goes at getting the regulations right. And you're absolutely right, it is a very concerning issue, notwithstanding that it's ring-fenced that we have got a growing deficit. Lobbying continues on that front. We've submitted just this week a disapplication request to government that kind of sets out the steps we're taking locally, but we have got limited scope really to manage demand or move funding between different parts of DSG. So the only long-term solution is more funding. Some commitment to that from government already going forward in terms of additional funding to schools, although the split for high needs isn't known. So we'll be watching the the spending review closely for any further announcement on that. But it needs a longer term solution than we've currently got.
Right, and my final point, I think, is to oh no, I've got some more. Point out that to the 10 men who are on my screen, as opposed to the 4 ladies, that the longevity assumption for men has dropped by 1.3 years for men at age 65. So we need to be cautious, chaps.
Bit late to tell me that now, Chairman.
I think a few of us are living on borrowed time as well.
Right, I allow the hubbub to subside. 162 guided bus. It's not practicable to estimate the potential result, re long-term debtors. But I do find that we've got 2.4 credit in the balance sheet. 164 heritage. We do not consider reliable valuation information can be obtained given the lack of any comparable market values. And then in the next paragraph, we say, with no sense of irony, that the archives were valued this year by Bonhams, and the change since 2008 to 2020, our valuation has gone up from 18.6 to 19 million. Do we know what this cost, the revaluation, and was it worth it?
So I think the Bonhams revaluation costs £2,800, and clearly on this basis, it's something we've had to do, I think, every 10 or 11 years or something in that order. I think whether it's worth it is probably a subjective judgment, but the heritage assets aren't really things that we can sell or realise that value. Yeah. So yeah, it's whether it's useful to know what they're worth or not. That the update is reflected across for insurance purposes, but again, are they things that can be replaced if they were damaged or destroyed? So yes. Right.
Yeah. The other thing to note is the benefit is also in obtaining an unqualified set of accounts, which we might not be able to achieve otherwise, because the audit requirement based on the accounting regulations is that they are revalued.
Revalued how often?
And that's where it's a little less clear, and because it's about being able to be certain that they are materially accurate. So it is, we have had quite a long period this time. It will be an ongoing discussion about when it needs to be carried out again.
Councillor Maguire, as you wear some of this stuff, do you have any comment?
That's why I just, sorry, no, I am unmuted. That's why I just put my hand up, Chairman, because I was desperately trying to find the page from my earlier notes. As you say, in terms of the civic regalia, I've often commented that the very fact that we don't have any value for it, much of this stuff is just the biggest belief. I appreciate that in the scheme of things, it's probably not considered a significant amount. But I think there is an opportunity, and maybe we would like to make a comment on it, that given the move next year to a new headquarters and the need to, there's an awful lot of stuff held by the County Council, which is not actually seen. You just have to go into the chairman's office to actually see some of this stuff. Much of it will not have any intrinsic value. It'll be just something that's been presented to us. There is other stuff which actually ought to be valued. I mean, I have here in my home a gold chain.
Yeah.
And that's in my possession. That's got some just by the very weight of it. And the assumption is it's good gold. So I may take it to Dubai and get it weighed or something. I think they just do it by weight. But notwithstanding that, we ought to take the opportunity when they start to move stuff to actually, and much of it should be on public view anyway, take the chance to value it. Shouldn't miss the chance. That's what I'm saying, Chairman.
So what I would say is we have passed this issue over to Democratic Services because it's as you say, it's such small value in terms of the accounts. It's not an issue for the accounts. It's far too immaterial. I have had a couple of updates about why that hasn't happened, around things being in different people's possession and needing to wait for people to change. And perhaps, as you're right, the move to Alconbury could be an opportunity for some of that, but that will need to remain with Democratic Services to review and put in place.
I think the bigger question is, what are we going to do with the 1,500 skeletons that we've got? Mac, you're still hand up.
I'm not going to take it down just now, Chairman, because I just wanted to come back, because I couldn't help reflecting back to something you said right at the start of this meeting, when I think classes or something, I can't remember what it was, or something that didn't get handed back after they died. I thought, well, they're not going to hand it back if they're dead. And I couldn't help thinking, would somebody know where I've got this gold chain if anything ever happened to me? But never mind, that's just my family may benefit.
Right. Terry, I think it's your moment. On page 186, we have a reference to 6,244 undecided leavers.
As you guessed, members, the chairman's already prepped me on this, and I managed to get a definition of undecided leavers, which has always left me wondering what that term actually meant. And basically what it states is a number of unprocessed leaver records where a member has left a period of pensionable employment and is not entitled to immediate payment of pension benefits, but is entitled to either a refund of contributions, aggregation with another period of pensionable membership, and or deferred pension award. Basically, over the short period this has been ongoing, the numbers have increased, and that's basically, again, to external influences. Primarily, scheme employers have not been notifying the fund that members have left their employment, and also they've been providing, although we've demanded it, late input to the officers. In 2020, we managed to reduce the total numbers from 11,082 down to 9,636. And during this period, we're hoping to again reduce that down to 5,000 cases. But I must admit, we're not achieving what we had hoped, basically due to, obviously, some of our officers have been redeployed. And secondly, again, with the schools facing the problems they're facing, the input into the system has been again delayed. But basically, the resolution of undecided leavers is that the report by the external auditor was something needs to be done. We are doing the best we can as it currently stands. I'm happy to take any questions.
I hope you all feel better for knowing that now. I think they're satisfied, Terry. Page 206, I think it is, or 200, investment income is down from 45 million in the pensions to 34 million. And that was only the period up to the end of March, which you'll remember was, well, it has not covered the period of the COVID crisis. And I think that the reduction in income is going to get very much worse because banks and others are being told not to issue dividends. So I think we could be in for a very nasty hit there. Right, on page 196, material valuation uncertainty. It's not possible to accurately predict the scale of the impact of COVID-19. As a result, 1920 pooled property valuations have been based on info prior to the outbreak. And this is the bit that I find staggering, on the assumption that values will be restored once property markets recover. I think that's a horrendously dangerous statement to make. And given that property is a significant part of the portfolio, I think that's a very odd approach to make. And then my final comment is I'm not really sure why we need two sets of glossaries at the end. It just takes up an enormous amount of paper. Is there anything we can do about that?
So the difficulty is that we have to include the pension fund accounts within our accounts, which has within it a glossary. Then obviously the council accounts needs a glossary covering some different and further in more issues. I would need to speak to the preparers of the pension fund accounts to see if it's possible to
cross-refer.
Yes.
Because it's about 7 or 8 pages. And
what I have done is remove from the glossary for the council's overall accounts any glossary items that only appear in the pension fund accounts to reduce that, because we had got quite a bit of overlap. So I have
done what you could.
Yes.
Thank you. Right. I have no more questions on the accounts. Does anybody wish to stop me moving on? No. So we need, I think, to cover off the annual governance statement. Neil, is there anything, I mean, we have this every year, and you say the same things every year. Is there anything new you want to bring to our attention on the annual governance statement?
No, Chair, I think you saw it at the last meeting. There's been no proposed or any changes since the last meeting. So I'll propose it to be the same,
right,
as you saw last time.
Amazingly, I have no comment to make on it, so we can move on to the next item. And this is where I think I would like to switch the agenda so that we take.
Chairman, can you just get the committee to approve the actual?
Oh, well done, Rob. Thank you very much. Is the committee happy to approve the annual governance statement and all the bits in between that I have to sign? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's fine. Oh,
and you're also delegating responsibility to yourself and the Chief Finance Officer to, once finalised, approve and sign the final audited set of accounts.
Right, and that's if there's anything that worries me in that, obviously I'll come back for committee approval, which may have to be done electronically. Right.
Sorry. We also need the sign off for the unadjusted audit errors that we will continue not to adjust for those.
Are we happy for that? Yes. Thank you. Right, before your thumbs get tired. Now, we should be now moving to safer recruitment in schools, but I think what I'd like to do with your approval is to do the Transformation Fund monitoring report next, so that James can go back to doing useful work and we can then talk about safer recruitment to schools where Diane can't be with us. Are people happy about that? Thumbs, yes, thank you very much. James.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to provide a couple of points of context before opening up for questions. Okay. So just to highlight that the report format has changed slightly from the previous quarter's report following feedback from members. And the main change is that there's a new section in there providing a brief overview of the impact seen from using the Transformation Fund as a whole, rather than just this quarter's report. As the know, GPC provide an oversight of all the successful Transformation Fund bids, so those that have bids that have accessed the Transformation Fund, and those are all published on the council's web pages as part of their committee packs. But it's also worth noting that the work is also reviewed and monitored through the appropriate service committees. Would like to highlight that that's not the full extent of all the transformation work that is undertaken. The Recovery Board, which was formerly called the Business Development Improvement Board, currently sees the major change programs and strategic initiatives across the organisation. It does meet monthly with a membership of all corporate and service directors supported by corporate leads, and it does feed in reports to business planning groups and chairs and vice chairs. The Recovery Board also provides the forum for new ideas to be discussed and progressed through the system, and in particular within the current COVID world will also is responsible for thinking about the recovery work. So the recovery work and our post-COVID recovery will be identified and emanate from that group. And then finally, before turning to the paper, the transformation team itself does work in addition to the projects that come through transformation funding. We work on sort of dozens of other projects which very much range in size and scale, and each have an appropriate level of service-specific governance depending on the project. But all the projects run through a particular project methodology, and they're ultimately monitored through JMT. So turning to the paper itself, there has been an increase in the total amount allocated. So the think.
Sorry, say that again. There has been an increase in the total amount allocated.
Right. This quarter. So the Think Communities bid has been approved through GPC, and there's also a bid for the Micro Enterprise Development Pilot was approved at October GPC as well. And there remains approximately £15 million of the fund to allocate. Of those projects that have drawn down this quarter, you'll note that the Adults Positive Challenge programme remains as red for the second quarter running. Mitigation actions were outlined in full in quarter one's report, but support is being provided from to the service from transformation and finance to progress those mitigation actions as swiftly as possible. And what we've also done is link to a more detailed update that was part of the October business planning paper in that report. So if you wanted to go into more detail about what the current challenges are in that programme and why the programme remains red, then the detail is set out within that paper. So I'll pause there for any questions.
Members? Terry looks as if yep.
You've asked me to turn to another paper as regards the question of the Adults Positive Challenge programme, I think it was. I'm just trying to go back up in the paper. I'm sorry, my machine is a little bit slow at the moment, which is signposted as red. Why is it? What has been the problem there?
So there has obviously been the impact of COVID, which has seen a huge demand on additional services on our services. The specific service detail is outlined within that paper. I must say that I'm not an expert within the adults world, but I think there has been some the impact on the kind of environment in the operating environment has been very challenging. So there's been increased care costs, market resilience pressures, the loss of trust in the traditional services, and obviously the anticipation of winter pressures. There has been changes to the care market, so infection control measures, because of the pandemic, are now part of the cost base. The reduced bed-based occupancy levels, etc., all have impacted on the forecasting, and the previous demand modelling that was done within the service applied historical demand patterns, which obviously have all been up in the air since the pandemic.
If I may, Chair, I mean, you described me the practical problems associated with this particular project, but in essence, when I read the paper, I'm looking at the mechanics and the administration, and I find it difficult if we're looking at the methodology that we introduced this programme. To an extent, you're telling me now that the practical problems have caused strong delays. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the the method. So when the Adults Positive Challenge Programme was incepted a couple of years ago, that there was a clear and robust methodology for being and cost modelling predicted on what we would save through the life of that programme. The practical challenges of being able to deliver that now have made that much more challenging. Obviously, what we are trying to do through the mitigating actions is mitigate that challenge as much as possible.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I understand that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Got a couple of points. I would commend the use of the humble hyphen to make your report easier to read, because you have many double-barreled words. How many new projects did we have in the last year?
So I don't have that data to hand, Councillor. What I can do for you is pull together a summary of all of the transformation fund bids that have gone through to GPC, so you can reference what has come through.
That's fine. And what are you doing to generate new projects?
So
do you see this as your responsibility, or are you simply there to serve them once they've thought of their ideas?
And so, well, the recovery board, as I mentioned in sort of my opening statement, is the place where the new ideas and the recovery for the organisation will generate from for the major change programmes. For the
no, sorry, don't accept that. The new thoughts come from officers, and I'm wondering what you're doing to stimulate the people to think about what are you going to do in this area, or do you not see that as part of your responsibility?
Yeah, so the transformation team has the responsibility to support all services in the generation and support new ideas. So there are multiple routes in to feed those ideas through. So services are able to approach with ideas that they would like to investigate and test. Those opportunities are also flagged through service areas through the directorate management teams, which ultimately come through to the recovery board, and the recovery board has the oversight to make sure that those
supposing you ran out of projects and they'd all run their course and we were at nil, what could you do to make sure that we had some new projects?
So there's I don't think we'd ever be in that situation, Councillor. I think there's
I understand that, but live in my world for a moment, my hypothetical world.
So in a hypothetical world where there was no new ideas being generated, then we would look we would look to see what is going on out there in the world. We would look at best practice across other areas and organisations. We will use the networks and contacts that we have available to think about new possibilities and new opportunities.
Are you investigating what other people are doing?
We always, for most of our project work, depending on what it is, we always look to see what others are doing to try and see if there are elements that we are able to learn from and adapt and use within our particular work.
Could you give me a for instance?
For instance, that's a good question. There's quite a few. So I think the first iteration of the Best Start in Life programme, we looked at Leeds Child-Friendly City, how they had run and managed their programme, and we used and adapted some of that thinking within our work. I think with the Adults Positive Challenge, there was the initial sort of investigation and insight into that took knowledge and learning from adult services across the I think it was across the country to try and build an idea of what could be done within Cambridgeshire.
Good, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. We've got you down, I think, Rob. Have we got a report scheduled for January?
I'd have to look at the programme. Sorry, I don't know offhand. I wouldn't have thought it's that.
Or perhaps it's in the text that it says that a report will be coming. Either way, could you do a new report? I mean, I would like to see the table of where we are by project that we used to have, which is GPC doesn't want. Well, I think I would still. Perhaps we'll talk about this outside the meeting, James. Running immediately counter to my thinking there, ask the committee, how frequently do we want a report on this area, or are we content to leave it to other existing channels? I think we got here because there was some wobble in the early figures, and whether we were getting more than we were investing. I think we've resolved that.
Chairman, can I just say the next meeting is scheduled for the 23rd of March, which would be the next quarter.
Right, okay. Thank you, Rob. Do we want a quarterly report, members? Mac?
Sorry, Chairman, yeah, I've just been looking at the forward agenda. We do have a Transformation Fund Monitoring Report, Quarter 3, scheduled to come to, presumably, the next meeting.
I thought there was something, yes.
Yeah, that's the January meeting.
Yeah.
Just sure I'm not misreading it because I'm looking at a different device.
I know, and that means the paper would have to be in on the 13th of January.
Yep.
Are you sure you're not talking about the performance report? Sorry, because I haven't got it on my programme here.
Let me just.
I think it's in the text, Rob.
Okay.
It's a monitoring report, Transformation Fund Monitoring Report for Quarter 3.
So we'll refine this outside the meeting.
Sorry, that is March. That is March. If you look at the, if you look at page 350, and then goes on to 5.1. It's actually the March meeting, Quarter 3, Transformation Fund Monitoring.
You're right. There is a little gap. There is a little, horizontal line there, which you can see easy to miss on my looking at my other device here. Yeah, you are right. It's the March one.
Terry.
I don't think we need a quarterly report. I think a half-yearly report would more than suffice.
James, would you worry if you didn't have more opportunities to hound the committee?
As much as I love seeing you all, I would be okay with a half-yearly report.
Members? Okay, let's go for that. Rob, can you make the necessary adjustment?
Yes, certainly.
Right. I've run out of comments. Thank you for coming, James.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you again in 6 months' time. Those of us who are still here. And see you then.
See you. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Right. That takes us to safer recruitment, and then I think we'll have a little pause. Diane can't be with us. Members have had the paper. Do you have any comments? Oh, sorry. Do we need, Rob, I need to do something about the transformation? What's the conclusion? We note the report?
Sorry, that was just for noting that report.
That's fine. So we know that one.
Your next report would be something like June.
Yeah,
months.
That's fine. Safer recruitment then. I've got a number of comments. On para 2, we've got a list of maintained schools, primary and some secondary academies and special schools. And I quite like the numbers against each that they managed to provide services to. In terms of academies, where some academies use us and other academies use other things, I'd like to know what other providers offer to attract our potential customers. there's a reference to training that they carry out, and it says well attended. Well, you know me, I like numbers rather than phrases. So I'd like some numbers against that. And 3.7, it says the Ofsted safeguarding complaints are rarely linked to safer recruitment. So what I'd like to know is what they are linked to. So those are the points that I got out of that paper. Anybody want to modify that or add anything or subtract anything? No. Right, it's 3:44. Short comfort break. Back for Manor Farm and engineering, Skanska and others. 10 to, or do we need 10 minutes each? 5, good. 10 to. Thank you very much, people. So far, so good, I think.
If everyone wants to just take their cameras off, because we'll still be online.
It is difficult when you get two machines and you carry out Rob's advice on the wrong machine. Rob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What's the... We're short of 3 councillors at the moment.
Your quorum is
councillors.
4.
Sorry?
Your quorum is 4.
Do they have to be present in the meeting?
How do you mean? Yeah, they do have to be present in the meeting, yes.
Right. The fact that they've logged on before doesn't help.
No,
Okay.
no.
So I need...
Well, some of them might be here, but they haven't turned their cameras back on. Let's see, you've got Councillor Williams, yourself.
We haven't got Councillor Sanderson and we haven't got Councillor Rogers.
You've got Councillor Hudson.
And Maguire.
So you've got your quorum. You can start.
Right. Let us start.
We'll come back.
What I'd like to do, again, with your permission, members, is to fiddle around with the agenda. I think we've got 3 items still to do. The farm audit, internal audit, progress report, and the forward plan. I would like to try and avoid, if at all possible, running into an area where we have confidential information, which we then need to go into private session, but then we've got some unconfidential information, so we need to try and get back all the people that we excluded, and that all seems to be fairly tricky. So what I'd like to do is jump to the forward agenda plan and get that out of the way, because that's a fairly noddy item, and then deal with the other 2. Welcome, Graham.
Chairman.
Is that okay, members? Yes, good. Fine. So, Rob, the forward agenda plan, please.
Right, forward agenda plan, as you requested last meeting, I've only put on the agenda the one that goes up to the next elections.
Yeah.
So, in addition to on the January meeting, we'll have the request on the property asset system update from Tony Cooper to come, and you've asked him to come along. There'll be
that'll cheer him up. Yes.
There'll be the National Fraud Initiative update on its value, which will, I presume, will be part of the internal audit progress report, actually, rather than a separate report. And also, I believe possibly the report on BDO on the status of their work on the 2017 value for money conclusions and 2000 objections and their timetable. So they're additions to the January meeting.
I would really look forward to that last item.
And also, sorry, just bear with me for a sec. If you want to look at the January to maybe consider whether, in that we might still be in a COVID type situation, whether some of the reports listed, you'd be happy to take them as emails rather than formal agenda items. Do you want me to run through them?
Yes, please.
Debt management 6-monthly progress update. I'm pretty sure you want that on the agenda.
Absolutely.
Last one. The other one would be Tom will presumably the accounts will be over by then. So then we've normally had a statement of accounts, action improvement plan of how we can improve things further. Do we still want a report like that? And
Tom, can we do that?
If there's a lot on the agenda, I would ask you to consider whether we can give you that update in March. We've had a fairly thorough go through that today, or we can give you an email update around
I hear
that time.
but I mean, March runs us right up against the elections as far as a number of us are concerned. And Mac.
I just going to say, respects, Chairman, that shouldn't really matter. It is a case of spreading the agenda. So even though the election's not till May anyway, so a March report seems perfectly reasonable to me.
And do you want that on the agenda or by?
Well, hang on. I mean, my thought is that we've given this quite a good go today, as Tom says. But I would want to know if the agenda, if the improvement plan reflects what came out of today in the view of the councillors. And if we're going to make any additions, then they would need to be done earlier rather than later. Don't know what you think. I mean, Mac, if you want to push it, then I'll back off. But I would be concerned.
I'd rather hear the views of the other councillors, Chairman.
Other councillors?
I'm with you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm with you as well.
I think that gives me a voting majority, Mac. So
I'm with you, Chair. Sorry, I couldn't find my switch.
That's fairly democratic.
Yeah.
Can I clarify, what are you actually agreeing on that one? Sorry.
My view is that there are some items for improvement which have been included in the statement of accounts report. There's been a lot of discussion this afternoon about a number of items, or including a number of items, and we just want to make sure that the work that Tom and his team are doing reflects in scope and urgency and resourcing the work that needs to be done in order to have us swimming on the dot scheduled statement of accounts next year.
So you asked, I think I take it that you are asking for a report to the January meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
I can do that. Okay.
Performance report Q2. The last 2 or 3 have been by email rather than actually a report on the agenda.
Happy with that? People okay with that? No objections, right?
Integrated finance monitoring report.
We haven't had one of those. Well, we didn't have one of those this time, did we?
No, because you agreed to take it as email.
Yes.
You made that decision at the last meeting.
Same again? Okay.
6 monthly report in respect of consultancy expenditure and compliance with the policy. I think the last one you did have as an email.
What do people think? Do we still want to keep on top of this? Terry, you look as if you're about to say something.
I think we should look at this one.
Right.
On the agenda?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. If everyone agrees, yeah. Internal audit progress report, obviously, that always comes forward. And that's really it, the agenda plan.
Okay.
I spoke about earlier.
Have we completed that?
I think you have.
Right. Now, there was some substantial and very confusing discussion as to whether we took item 8, farms, before internal audit 9 or 9 before 8. The piece of paper I've got says we take 8 before 9. Does anybody remember it differently? Right. Item 8. Farms audit update. Duncan, I think you have issued a note.
Thank you, Chair. The report submitted to the committee gives the requested update on the progress of this work, which started in, members will recall, in 2019. As the report highlights, the work is largely complete and the report is being fact-checked with key stakeholders. So far to date, we have considered over 300 comments in respect and responses from the stakeholders to the report. The deadline for response is now the 27th of November, which is this weekend. And the report will then be finalised and issued to the council. And my target date for that is the 4th of December. So that's a very tight time scale and is dependent on the volume of responses we may receive between now and the closure date.
Duncan, Duncan, I need to sorry, but you said it would be issued to the council
Yes.
on the 4th of December.
So that would fundamentally that would go to the chief executive and the monitoring officer in the first instance. But I was just about to say, Chair, that the report will then be provided by the chief exec and the monitoring officer. It's been agreed that the report will be provided to the chair and vice chair of this committee and the leader to discuss and agree the next steps. And that discussion would include the chief exec, monitoring officer, myself, chair, vice chair, and the leader to discuss and agree the next steps of handling that report consistent with the original terms of reference, and importantly, the issues that will be contained within the report that need proper consideration in order that the next steps properly protect the council's interests. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Sorry, so that when that's issued, you're telling me that it will be issued to Terry and me and Steve. That's as a confidential report, not this is destroyed before reading, etc.
It will be issued to you in confidence to agree the next steps. And one of those next steps would be whether it would be published or still held in confidential standing until the next steps were, whatever those next steps agreed might be to conclusion.
Right, well, I mean, this started in January or February 19, still not resolved. Clearly, it's all right, John, got you. Clearly, we have to have a public exposure of this at some stage. I note that Priti Patel was 4 months, it took 4 months to report and then a few months more to go public. And we're the best part of 2 years. And I feel particularly sorry for those who are named in the report, and I haven't seen it, but I imagine that they are, with this hanging over them. So let's just see how we're going to get on today in terms of the schedule. I've got John Williams waving his hand energetically and Peter Hudson's hand up. I'll take John first because he was energetic.
Thank you, Chair. This so smacks of kicking the can down the road, trying to put it off as long as possible, presumably past the elections in May. It's just not acceptable. We were promised that we as a committee would have a sight of this report, that it would be discussed in a public session, and therefore there would be a you know, a redacted version of the report available for the public.
Okay, John, I can't hear you.
To see.
All right.
That now we're saying it will be a confidential report, and its future will be decided. What happens to that confidential report will be decided by the chief exec, the monitoring officer, and the chair and vice chair of this committee. That's not what.
And the leader.
And the leader. That's not what we promised would happen. And, you know, given the seriousness of the allegations, this has to be seen to be done in a transparent way. There has to be a report to this committee, confidential report, and then there has to be a public report in public session to enable the public to have their view on what they believe has happened, what should happen next. This really is a case of trying to, I won't say cover it up, but it's not making it transparent at all. And as I say, it's just, I don't know if you heard my opening, but it's just kicking the can down the road in the expectation that we can get it beyond the next elections. And you know, it's not, as I say, we promised the public, it's not transparent. And really, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, really, about what we are proposing to do here.
Okay, just to point out that when you say beyond the election, of course, the election starts with Purdah, which is March.
Yeah,
Peter.
Absolutely. So you know, it's not even May. We're talking about, you know, beginning of March, and that's it.
Right, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Well, John, I don't know if this is the first. It may well be, but I absolutely agree with you 100%. Every word you said could have come from my mouth. As an observation, Chair, this report, 18 months to produce a report, and then this report had to be corrected over 300 times, which really makes one think how good the report was or how correct the facts were in the first place. All my questions and comments are in the public domain, either, and they're all from this report or from emails I've had from officers explaining the hold-ups, which I really appreciate. I'd like to talk first of all about the police investigation. The police investigation finished in April 2020 after 10 months of police investigation. And this is where an elected member...
Sorry, Peter. Duncan, did we have to stop while the police investigation was going on?
Apparently so.
We were instructed by the police not to progress, and any
fine.
issue that we progressed whilst they were looking at it required their explicit agreement.
Thank you. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you.
Thank you, Chair. You did interrupt me, I can't remember. Yeah, the police investigation finished in April 2020, which is 7 months ago, 7 long months ago. And the police report was 10 months where an elected member of this authority was put into the arena and came out the other side without any action being taken by the police. 10 months of public money on an investigation that was obviously referred to the police by this authority with an outcome of absolutely no further action. Could I ask I have many questions. My first question, yes, we had an elected member investigated by the police. Were there any county council officers also investigated by the police in this investigation?
Through you,
Peter,
Chair.
but I have to say that I haven't seen the report, so
neither have I, sir.
I can't give you any information. I've not seen it, and I've not had detailed discussions about it.
I'm sure Duncan can answer that question.
Yes, through you, Chair. We referred the issues to the police for them to form a view on individuals who might be subject to investigation. I would rather not comment on which individuals the police may or may not have been looking at. But to respond to your answer, we sought the police advice and referred our work to date to them, and it was their decision where their investigations were progressed.
Yeah, okay, so we know for a fact that an elected member was investigated. So wasn't the county council officers investigated too? Obviously, we don't want names, but did the police also investigate the county council officers?
I think the police considered potential offences regarding multiple individuals.
Thank you. I'll just briefly, I want to go on to this subject access requests. I mean, the question is why? If people involved in this investigation asked for information, should this not council just provide that information anyway? Will you ask for this information before any subject access request was made?
No, Councillor.
So you were not asked for it?
Correct, Councillor.
Thank you. So the subject access request was asked for it in around about May, and we have 1 month to respond, or 3 months maximum in exceptional circumstances. So that was up in August. It's now November. Have you responded to the subject action request?
Councillor, subject access requests were not submitted into internal audit. They were submitted into the relevant part of the council that then administers those requests. So they weren't actually submitted directly in response or as part of the investigation. They were submitted as formal subject access requests into the council and are being handled by that part of the council's operations.
Yeah, but I've also been informed that this has been delayed because of these subject access requests. So can somebody tell me if we have responded to these access requests?
I'm as I sit here, I'm not able to say a definitive yes or no whether all of that information as requested has been provided. Sorry, Councillor.
Okay, can the monitoring officer answer that?
I can, as far as I'm able to, Councillor Hudson. The process for going through those is nearing completion, and it hasn't been responded to yet. But that, again, some of these are receiving legal advice on what's disclosable and what's not. So that's all I can say at the moment.
Okay, so we've gone way past the 3-month maximum of responding to this. Also, moving aside and working alongside this investigation, there's also investigation on the farms, and I see in the report that's been completed, but we haven't seen it. And the new chap who's just come in, he's going to take on all the information and get it right, we hope, but we haven't seen it, and we should see it because it's all part of this. Why haven't we seen it, or even had any form of briefing on it? This is back to our estates people, isn't it, which we spoke about earlier.
Through you, Chair, one of the key pieces of feedback we had from the original fact-checking process was that the issues within the farms audit were directly interrelated with the original terms of reference that we were given. And I've agreed to a submission that was made to us that those two reports are best considered as a combined single report. So when we talk about the report that is currently subject to fact check and that should be issued by the 4th of December, we're talking about that single report that will deal with the original terms of reference for Manor Farm and the audit of the farm's service. And as you rightly highlight, Councillor, that report has now been shared with Tony Cooper as the relevant director for that area, and we are expecting his comments on the report. Could I just add at this point, because it was a point made around that I highlighted that we received 300 comments that we had to consider. That's careful wording by me. They did not result in 300 corrections to the report. Stakeholders were entitled to submit any comment or evidence that they felt was relevant. So 300 comments returned reflects the view of stakeholders, but not necessarily changes to the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, that's understandable. I'm almost finished, Chair, because I'll explain why in a moment. I'm going on now to where it says the next steps. And this is the sort of thing John was talking about. And I quote, "It is essential in order to properly protect the council's interest and its duties of all stakeholders, including the Audit and Accounts Committee." I mean, I'm not sure what protection I need myself. I'm not sure what protection my other elected colleagues on this committee might need either. And the Chief Executive, the Monitoring Officer, our Internal Auditor, the Leader, Chair and Vice Chair will make an informed decision. Well, I don't know what an informed decision is. And if any informed decision should be made, we should be involved in it. Chair, I'm going to finish because this is absolutely unbelievable. I have many more questions. And I'm not going to weigh down today's meeting because it's gone on so long already. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to write a letter to Mr. Wilkinson and the monitoring officer setting out all my questions.
And me, please.
Of course, that goes without saying, Chair. And I will set out all my questions. And however, if they're not answered satisfactorily, I will bring those questions back to the next meeting of this committee, where I will also hope and expect to see the final report. Thank you.
Energetic response. Thank you. Councillor Rogers, you have been in the wing, waiting in the wings.
I put my hand up much earlier, but since Councillor Hudson has spoken, my comment might be treated as something facetious now, and I'm not sure whether I should make it. All I can say is both the chairman and myself have no idea what is in the report, nor should we. I think that, and really, as a committee, we've been tied up with the legal aspects put before this council, and sometimes I question that myself, but I'm not going to say any more than that, that it's a question of what role does this committee play in this council when we have our hands tied behind our back by the legalese and jargon coming sometimes out of the offices, and I'm not naming any offices in particular. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Can I propose that, I mean, what will it take to ensure that we have a report back to our next meeting, regardless of what decision the great and the good come to as to what should happen next? Because I believe that even if they decide not to release the full report to the on a redacted version, that's fine, but we should still have the opportunity of discussing it at our next meeting, even if, you know, we do it in private and confidential. It's so important. What's the point of having our committee if we're not, if we're going to be muzzled over such an important report from internal audit as this is? You know, we have to see it, or we, you know, or at least discuss it, or at least debate it.
I think that's an issue for the monitoring officer.
All I can say is I will take all of what you've been saying today away with us and have another discussion with the Chief Executive about what the possibilities are. Is that right, Duncan?
Absolutely correct. I mean, it may sound hollow to members of the committee, but I think monitoring officer and I are working very hard on this, and dare I say, as frustrated around where we are with this. Some key challenges are placed within this process that require legal advice, and that consideration delays the steps that we may want to take, and certainly echo Fiona's comment that we will of course take on board the committee members' comments and revisit the issue. I mean, I have to emphasize I fully understand the committee members' concerns around this, but the intention of having, as we've worded it, an informed discussion around the content of the report with the chair and the vice chair is so that those next steps can be agreed. Now, those next steps may well, as some committee members are concerned, in your language, kick the can further down the road. However, another possible outcome from that discussion may be the convening of a special meeting of the committee and the immediate consideration of the report in public session. It is those options that we wish to discuss from an informed perspective of reading the content of the report, for that choice to then be exercised from an informed basis. So we are certainly not saying that this report is not coming to the committee in public session. All we are saying is we are close to issuing it as a final, and at that point the handling of that report can be discussed from an informed position, if we can then issue that report in confidence to the chair and vice chair for discussion with the chief executive and the monitoring officer over the potential consequences of each of those options. And those are not decisions that I will seek to make. It's just to support the chair and vice chair, etc., on making those informed decisions. Thank you, Chair.
Peter, did I dream it, or did I see a hand come up and then a hand disappear?
I took my hand down, Chair, because it's no point in talking anymore until I get the answer to my questions. If necessary, bring my answers to the next meeting of this next committee and insist we get the report before PERDA. Thank you.
Right. If I can just say that I view the possibility with absolute horror of this can being kicked down the road, such that my successor and some of your successors then have to pick this up new in a new council. I think that would be unimaginably difficult for anybody to pick this up. I am as anxious as all of us, A, to read the blessed thing because it's been a long time coming, and B, to get it resolved. And what I don't know is that if we were to come to the conclusion when Terry and I and the others get to see it, that we could have a meeting before Christmas, I would advocate we have a meeting before Christmas. If we can't, we're into January. There is bound to be a second meeting after that. You know, we're not going to get it all right first time round. For those who understand the terminology, we need a program of smiley faces. Ignore it if you don't understand that. I concede the absolute necessity for at least a second meeting and possibly a third, and March is not very far off. Can anybody tell me when PERDA actually starts?
It'll be the last week in March, Chairman.
Last week, so we've actually got a working March. So that's something. Members, the suggestion from the officers, as I read it, and I'm try and get this right, though my words may not be quite accurate. We are in the third iteration of, quotes, fact checking, unquotes, and that is due to finish by the 27th of this month, i.e. 3 days' time. The internal audit, who have their fingers on the keys for this document, then have a few small days in which to make any final adjustments to the document prior to its release to myself, the Vice Chair, the Leader of the Council, so that we can then join a meeting at a date unspecified as yet to consider what the next moves should be. I think that that's all that we are being promised at the moment, or suggested at the moment. I do, one thought that has come in the course of this meeting is the possibility of a redacted report if we have to go down there, but I would very much prefer not. Do people agree with my summary that that is where we are on this item? Duncan, as the author of the report, is that a fair summary of what you said?
One correction to that, Chair, which is we're not in the third cycle of fact checking, we're in the second cycle. We're only applying 2 cycles to that process. So there is a strong message in that we think we're ready to finalise the report. I think I would just add that those next steps include the consideration of publishing the report, the committee considering the report in a redacted version, or the committee considering the entire report in confidential session. All those are part of that discussion that we would want to have once you've had, and Councillor Rogers has had the opportunity to read the full report and understand what consequences and issues within the report influence those judgments.
Good. I slouch corrected. Thank you very much for that. Right, are we agreed? Do we all have a common understanding of where we are? At this stage, I think all we can do is note the report, isn't it? But express the view that we are extremely anxious that this be brought to a conclusion at the earliest possible opportunity. I don't see any dissenting hands. Right, done. So that just leaves us item 9, which is the internal audit progress report. Part of that deals with the, sorry, trying to find my notes, the highways contract, which I'm proposing to leave till the end. I note that in the report we have removed 42 items and not started 27. So I'd like outside this meeting an email to all members saying how many are we going to finish this financial year, and to note that COVID to the 31st of the 7th had absorbed 665.5 days, which I find a staggering figure. Under Appendix B, there is a suggestion that there are some mispayments under people who take in other fosterers. What I would say is that I did some work on this and would want people to be very careful to make sure that when we say people have had loyalty payments in the fostering hierarchy of accounts, and people are only entitled to a single loyalty payment, my belief is that some of those payments were other things that were simply classed and coded under loyalty payments as a convenient place to put it. And that could lead to some very unfair fining of people if they are falsely deducted money.
Did you want the officers to introduce the report first? I don't know.
No.
No. Okay.
I'll just deal with this. I take the correction, Rob, but and Ely, I see that we have a comment about reducing delegation away from the committee, which I view with some concern. I now bow to Mr. Sanderson's very sensible suggestion that I should let you deal with it, Neil. Could you, but leave highways till the end?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I shall. I'm going to look a different angle, so it's nothing personal. It's just that I'm on a different screen. Okay, so apologies. So just to as way of an introduction, the report is to report on the main areas of audit coverage for the period to the 6th of November. You'll be aware that it's quite similar to the last committee, so there's not much to report really in terms of an updated audit progress report. However, the committee is asked to note and comment on the report. I think you've already alluded to the appendix 1 detailed in section, sorry, appendix A detailed in section 2. The original 2021 audit plan was scheduled for about 1,750 days, and that almost came to the March committee, but that one was cancelled. But we think it got approved as it was, it was at least a public document. Obviously, following that, COVID hit, and as you've rightly alluded to, we've had a lot of work redirected in accordance with our business continuity plan. I think I outlined where that time had gone at the last progress update in October. I mean, in reality, the team is still being heavily impacted by COVID, and the environment is changing so rapidly. It's very difficult at any given time to say that's what we're going to do for the next 3 months. And that's the benefit of having the audit progress report and the proposed plan coming both to JMT and this committee at such regular periods. So the plan you see today at Appendix A, first of all, is more than 1,750 days. It's cast at over 2,000, and that's to give flexibility to the audit team and to the organisation to reprioritise work that we may or may not have to undertake in the period. So we will not achieve the full 2,000 and odd days, 2,137 days that's actually in the plan. But what we will do is prioritise our resource to those areas of highest risk in the remainder of the year, with the one caveat that will definitely include the completion of the key financial system audits that committee requested at the last meeting, and that obviously would underpin the Chief Internal Auditor's annual opinion. And we can give assurances that that work will be finished before the end of March 2021, unless something incredible happens, which we can't obviously discount at this point in time. You'll also see that we've included the follow-ups, and again, you've already alluded to some of those, Chair, because there are 12 recommendations that haven't yet been implemented, all with dates that are in the future and have been changed to the future. I think it's a good news story. I say this every quarter. The organisation very much takes audit recommendations seriously, and we get the vast majority implemented without any problem at all. There are 12 outstanding, and the organisation and services are working towards implementation. So there's been no recommendations rejected, if that gives the committee some assurance. Section 3 has given an update on areas of activity, so it does include some daily spend work that we talked about last time, which is where we've been looking at daily transactions to obviously try and in real time see if there've been any breakdowns, any issues, any expenditure that probably we shouldn't be spending, in the absence of doing a sort of a full accounts payable audit. That accounts payable audit has now started, where we'll look at the systems again. It also talks about the PPN, which was the additional payments made to suppliers because of COVID, and as already alluded to, Appendix C, which will be taken later, is an update on the highways open book review. We've also got involved with one or two other areas, such as helping put some governance arrangements in for payment of grants for early year centres or early year settings. That's a support mechanism that the organisation's putting forward to help these settings basically survive this particular period. And then the final bit is section 5, which is the risk management update. You'll be aware that we bring a quarterly report to the committee. We have decided to bring a holding report, really, to give you a flavour of what's been happening with JMT over the last 6 months. You'll be aware that we agreed some new procedures the back end of 2019. We started those in 2020. The pandemic hit. Obviously, things then changed from being the corporate risk register to being a COVID risk register. That went to JMT Goldie each week, was taken tremendously seriously, was updated each week, everybody engaged. The end of September, JMT decided, with advice from officers, that actually COVID is really a trigger and not a risk in its own right, and that COVID would then go into the corporate risk register and be a trigger, and it would become business as usual. We're in the process with JMT members and risk owners in getting the risk register up to date and fit for purpose. And the plan is that we'll bring that fully back to committee in January 2021. And that's a rattle through the progress report, Chair. Ready for questions.
Right, my key question, I think, is that if we're if we've removed 42 items, how do we catch up? I assume these weren't put in order to make weight, in order to take up space. They were considered valuable. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, it's a very valid point. What happens anyway is every quarter, as I've already said, we bring what we believe, or the organisation believes, are the current risks and where best to deploy internal audit resource. There are some key areas where the Chief Internal Auditor will need an audit to have been undertaken in order to give an evidence-based opinion. You could probably say that that's the key financial systems, and they will be done in this financial year. The other areas where we would want to add value and give assurance are areas, for example, in the social services area. We have a number of audits there to check compliance.
Yeah, okay, but what are we going to do about it?
Well, we still have a coverage. What we've done in devising the plan, we have a coverage in each of those areas still. Just the coverage won't be as fulsome. So, for example, contract audit, where we had planned to do 200 to 300 days of contract audit, including open book reviews. That probably won't be fully completed in the year. However, those contracts will continue into next year. So what will happen is the audits will be rolled into next year's plan. Instead,
Rob, when are we next due to have an audit report?
Well, you'd get the internal audit progress report at the next meeting in January.
Right, okay. I mean, at that meeting, I think what I would like is a summary of what it is that we've not done that we said we were going to do, and then against each, what are we going to do about it? And it may say absorbed into future work in March. I mean, I don't mind that, but I just think we need to get a grip on what it is we're not doing.
I've had a go at that respectfully, Chair. The Appendix B does very clearly show what jobs have been removed and what jobs have been added. So it's not an easy read because the instruction was to get it onto one appendix, but it does show the original plan. It shows the jobs that have been removed and shows that the jobs that have been added in
and not started.
And not started, yeah.
Right, but what I haven't got in that is, and what are we going to do about the ones we've removed? Are they important or are they not? How are we going to cover it? Let's deal with that another time, Neil. We'll have a chat about it. Other members? Terry, I think at one stage you indicated you wanted to speak.
Yes, if I may. If I can turn to page 9, Neil, of the appendix, and I'm looking at anti-fraud and corruption. Bearing in mind how clever these characters who deal with hacking and the like, and looking at pages 15 to 17, I noticed we're reducing from our original plan of 75 down to a revised plan of 30. Does this concern you, or are you worried about this in any way, please?
Just checking, is that the, I think the page numbers are not easy to follow, but that would
I'm on Appendix A.
Oh, right, okay, got you.
Appendix A, page 9, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we do at the start of the year, we put an estimate in for any referrals under fraud and corruption. And all we've done is for the second half of the year, we just halved it effectively. And so we have 6 months left. We're probably going to spend 30 days. But if you think about the other investigations that we're undertaking, we've just had a previous item where there's been time spent on an investigation. I think we probably are spending in excess of the 70 days in that area. And also, if we do get a referral, each referral gets passed over to our counter fraud team. That's risk assessed, and realistically, if it's something we need to look at, we will find resources to look at anything that has to be looked at. So I can give some reassurance there. It's really a contingency figure, but we always know we spend at least 70 days, and ordinarily more.
So that subject to fraud and corruption is one of your top priorities if something occurs then?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. If it's, yeah, we always react very proactively to any,
Thank you,
any
Chair.
referrals.
Right, anything else, members? Okay, so I think that now takes us to the highways contract. I'd like to thank officers who've come and had to sit through a lot of stuff which doesn't directly affect them. And I'm sorry that we got the timing estimate slightly wrong. We prefer to bring people in closer to the time that they're actually excitably off. Who's going to say what?
Excuse me, Chairman, if you're going to go to the confidential appendix, or are you not at first? Are you just going to take the cover report? Because otherwise...
we'll start with the cover reports and then see where that takes us.
Neil, just say the
Yeah, I think we're looking at Appendix C, are we not?
No, well, you've got a commentary in your main report. I don't know if members want to look at that first and then decide if they want to go into the detail in confidential Appendix C.
That's, I mean, that's paragraph 3.4, members, in the main report, which is on page 3, I seem to think. 1 second. Caught me out there, sorry. Yeah, so 3.4, the background is that there was a highway service contract review done a couple of years ago. A report was issued and it raised concerns about the reconciliation between actual costs and payments not being completed. And we've been working with the highway service since then to work alongside Skanska, or the highways contractor, to get actual costs from them for the first years of the contract. In February 2020, the one outcome of this process was that the contractor made a substantial repayment to the council in lieu of a formal reconciliation, and that
was covering which period?
I mean, that's the difficult thing to say, Chair. It's because we haven't had the reconciliation, we don't really know exactly where that refund of money relates. However, as a council, we're not going to say no. We were very happy to take the interim payment from the contractor, but we made it very clear that that in no way prejudice the full reconciliation, which still needs to be done, followed by the open book review. So the reconciliation is a paper exercise, really. The contractors say what they state their actual costs, and we check that against payments. And then the open book review is where internal audit will go in and check back their stated actual costs back to their prime records. So it's a two-stage approach. And the first stage is to get the reconciliation from the contractor. And that's been problematic, and the service have been raising the using the levers within the contract, raising the stakes with the contractor to try and get the information. And I think that's the reason why it's useful that Graham and Richard are here to give a service perspective.
So where are we with getting the information?
We have been promised the latest information by this Friday, and obviously we're hopeful that will be the end of the first reconciliation process.
I'd like an email on Monday, please, telling me whether or not the information came through, copy to all the other council members here.
Yeah, I mean, I can do that on behalf of the service, so if the service want to do that, between us, we'll sort that out, Chair.
Right. Graham, do you wish to add anything?
No, thank you, Chair. That's fine. I think Neil's introduced it well. Thank you, Chair.
Richard?
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing else to add.
Well, my question.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, beg your pardon. Yes.
If I may, I'd like to ask some of the questions of Graham and Richard of what I kind of touched on this morning, and I'm not sure whether that goes into confidentiality or not.
I think if there's any doubt, I think at this stage probably let's exclude the press and public and shut off, because I think there is a risk. It's difficult to say. If you want to go into more detail of Graham and Richard, I think you will inevitably start getting into business sensitive territory, and I would suggest you exclude the press and public and stop the YouTube recording.
Right, well, before I propose that, Mac's been trying to flag my attention, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Both Councillor Williams and myself have both had our hand up for a while. I think Councillor Williams was actually before me. So before we even think about going into closed session. I just wanted to pick up a comment being made earlier on about how long has this been going on. My recollection from the summary report, the covering report, was this has been for probably the last 4 years that we've, and which if our memory serves me rightly, and I'm sure Graham Hughes come and correct me if I'm wrong, is probably the start of the contract with Skanska anyway. So it's well overdue, I would suggest. But I think I think it may have been yourself, Chairman, who asked. You know, it is the last 4 financial years, as I understand it.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Maguire, just to confess, Richard picked me up this morning and said actually it is only 3 years. It's just felt like 4. So apologies, it's the 3 financial years.
Okay.
Right. John, you wish to say something. Is that likely to drag us into confidential, or is it something I prefer?
No, it's just a clarification from Neil.
Yeah, I'd like as much as possible to be in public.
Yeah, this is a clarification. It's not going into Appendix C. And that is, let me understand this. This has only come to light because Skanska tried to validate what we had paid them. And then they come to us and say, sorry, but our books don't tie up with what your payments. So actually, we've spent less on doing some jobs than you've paid us for overall, but we don't know in detail what jobs they are. But this is initiated by Skanska. It's not initiated by us looking at Skanska's books as part of internal audit to check that they are doing what we are actually asking them to do.
That not exactly, Councillor Williams. No.
Right.
So there are 2 control mechanisms within the contract. So without wanting to get too technical and sort of boring, as the operational controls work, what happens is that Skanska put in a target cost and say, we think we can do it for this amount. Officers and colleagues within the council look at that and say, yes, that's value for money. And then that estimate is then used to assess whether or not Skanska have performed well on the contract. So if they overspend the contract, so that particular part of the contract and that particular target cost, there's a thing called a pain. And then the contractor, it's called pain. So it's a pain gain mechanism.
Right.
So if the contract is in pain, that means that they don't get paid the full amount for that job. If they do it more effectively and efficiently and save money, and we agree that they've got the outcomes to the quality that we want, then there's a thing called gain, and then the contractor gets the benefit of that gain. So there's a pain gain calculation. However, that's essentially based on estimates. So the contract then has this second phase, and this is what we're talking about really. It's the second phase of the contract kicking in that says, that's all well and good, contractor, but actually this is an actual cost contract. Can you tell us the actual cost of delivering that that contract in the year? We then compare it against the payments that we've made as a council, deduct or add the pain gain, because obviously that has to be taken into account, a couple of accruals, and then you have a reconciliation, a paper reconciliation that says, right, what are the actual costs? Internal audit was working with the contractor to try and get the actual cost from the contractor, and we had 2 or 3 iterations of that. And it was in February of this year that the contractor came back and said, actually, we've looked at our records and we think that you have overpaid us.
This could be down to not them doing it more efficiently, but actually not completely carrying out the work in the first place.
No, that would be the first control.
That's the first control.
Yeah, the first operational control. If the work hasn't been done correctly, then that would get flagged up, and those costs will be disallowed. Right. Okay, so if it hadn't been
only when we go into confidential, I've got some examples of where,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's been happening anyway.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say there are some areas.
Okay. Are there any other points that need to be made or are better made in the public domain before we go into private to do some itty bitty stuff? No. In that case, I think I need to read the following. I ask the committee to agree that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the report contains exempt information under paragraph 1 and 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed in discussion as it contains information relating to an individual and the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. I hope everybody understands all that, but I think we...
Does the committee agree to exclude the press and public? Just to...
One,
Yeah,
two,
agreed,
three.
Chairman.
Yeah. Good, okay.